Hey, what's up, everybody? It's TJ, one of the co hosts of the Now Mind You podcast, and today I'm going to be reviewing chapter 242 of Tokyo Revengers. Now, as always, there will be spoilers ahead. Let's just get right into it. Chapter 242, let's talk about what we ended on, right? In the previous chapter, 241's last panel, we see a hopeful Senju looking up at Takemichi, who just declared his intent to take down the Kanto Manji gang. If we recall correctly, right, last chapter we went into the retcon past of Mikey, Senju, Haruchiyo, Baji, right, and we saw how horrific that was. Now, this chapter, as we get into the summary, right, what goes down? We see that the scene opens up with Takemichi looking at two important artifacts under the shelter of a car/bike port. The first artifact is the bike that Mikey and Draken gifted him, which is a clone of Mikey's bike. And Mikey's bike, as we all know, was his older brother Shinichiro's, right? He inherited that one through tragic means. It was going to be his anyway, but if you've read the manga, you know how he ends up obtaining that bike, and it's very linked to Kazutora and Baji, or I should say Baji. The other article, right, the second artifact, is the original uniform that Mikey wore when he and the four others founded, well, actually the five others really, founded Tokyo Manji Gang, right, Tokyo Manji Kai. We get a nice little double spread of Takemichi declaring to Mikey, right, even though Mikey's not there, right, declaring to Mikey that he's going to start a gang called the Tokyo Manji Gang. We then cut to Musashi Shrine, which is a familiar location for anyone who's been following the series so far, whether you got it from the anime or you've been reading the manga. But this is a familiar location in that so many important Toman meetings have taken place there, so many pivotal events have taken place there. We see a lot of familiar faces. We see Smiley, Angry, Pachin, Peian, Takemichi's crew, Suzuki, Yamamoto, Yamagishi, Sento, aka Akun, Mitsuya, Hakai, Inui, Senju, Chifuyu, and Takemichi. Chifuyu starts the meeting, and Takemichi declares his intent, right? Which is to bring Mikey back, get rid of the Kanto Manji gang, and essentially achieve what he calls our revenge. And with that, we see that the final arc is set in motion. Now, getting into my review for the chapter, honestly, it really felt like the start of a final arc. All the important players have been gathered, at least on the Takemichi side, right? It's certainly come full circle, and I can't help but think of the comparisons that have been made in the story and also like on various threads on the internet, right, between Hanagaki Takemichi and Sano Shinichiro, right, the founder of the Black Dragons, who ended up being the inspiration for, in part, of Mikey forming Toman in the first place, right? Mikey's bike, as I mentioned earlier, was essentially his older brother's anyway, and I mean it was gonna be his, and you know the incident between Kazutora, this is what sent Kazutora to Juvie. Baji and Shinichiro, where unfortunately Shinichiro died, right? They discovered that the bike that they were intending to steal for Mikey's birthday was going to be his anyway. One of the last things, too, that Baji said before he passed on, and this was during the Valhalla arc, right? Where we learn about Kazutora's existence and how Baji was secretly just trying to get Kazutora back. One of the last things he said was how much Takemichi reminded him of Shinichiro. Also, to a certain degree, we need to realize that the promise that Chifuyu made to Takemichi during the Valhalla arc about him helping Takemichi get to the number one spot has essentially been fulfilled. It's like there's a lot of full circle moments that we see here, particularly like this one of like, I mean, very high significance, right? But there are quite a few full circle moments in here. And then, yeah, Takemichi is now literally the head of Toman, albeit the second generation. And it's interesting, too, because, like, no one gathered there seems to object to him being the leader. Now, that being said, too, quite a few people are now aware of Takemichi's, like, time skip ability, right? So it's like, there are no surprises there, and they know that Takemichi's earnest in his desire to save everyone, to give everyone a good future, right? And we can see that they do have quite a few heavy hitters amongst them, most notably Senju and Angry. Now, as anyone who's been following the manga knows, right, Angry when he starts crying is unstoppable, like unstoppable, right? It would have been interesting to see how the battle of the three deities would have gone if Angry were on that field too. But we have to realize too that this is Mikey, like Mikey, right? This final arc, this final battle between Tokyo Manjikai and Kanto Manjikai, like there's no way that people on the Tokyo Manjikai side are going to come out of there unscathed. Like, for all of Takemichi's inspirational and endearing qualities, he is not a fighter. Like, they're not going to come out of this unscathed. Like, this is Mikey we're talking about. Mikey, like, remember, last chapter, that was Mikey as a kid. And this is Mikey fully embracing his darkness, fully unhinged. Like, we saw the damage he did during the battle of the three deities. This is not going to end well. Like, I see there being quite a few more deaths, in all honesty. Like, let's also recall, too, during that Valhalla arc, where we unfortunately lost Baji, Mikey took full-on blows to the head from a lead pipe by Kazutora, and that wasn't even enough to stop him. Like, other people were restraining him. 2 other dudes were restraining him, and Mikey took the blows head-on, and once that switch was flipped, he was different. Would I call Mikey a berserker? Kind of, in all honesty, I would. Before I go too far, though, let's talk about that last panel. Yes, Takemichi was never a kid or a teenager because it's always been his adult consciousness time skipping back to the past. But you can't help but see that he's grown, right? Obviously, like, the time skip was a little bit less further back in the past, right? Because he's a teenager. But he really does look mature in that last double. Well, it wasn't a double strip, but in that last panel, you know. I just thought that should be highlighted. And my final thought, right? This is more of a question. I'm definitely curious to see what people feel about this in the comments below. But I remember this is going to be kind of a major spoiler if you're not there yet in the manga. But I mean, if you're at this chapter, you've seen this. Like, it shouldn't be that big of a spoiler. It shouldn't be a spoiler at all, really. But was Kisaki meeting his end? Was his death a mistake? And I say this because one of the things Kisaki said near his demise, or like around that time, was that Mikey needed him to be his darkness. Mikey needed Kisaki in order to channel his darkness. And let's be real, all the stuff Kisaki did compared to an unhinged Mikey, like, Kisaki was a monster. Like a monster. Ruthless, cutthroat, made no qualms about ending a life in order to achieve his goals. That being said, though, him taking on that role, him taking on that responsibility, was that what, in a sense, would save Mikey's soul? I don't know. I'd love to see what people think, but I've been wondering that more and more because in every timeline where Kisaki was a problem, right, you don't hear so much about Mikey doing crazy things. You just hear more so about Mikey not being in the picture. Now, that's not the future that any of the OGs of the Tokyo Manjikai, Takemichi included, want. But, I mean, every timeline since Kisaki's end always ends with Mikey, somehow guaranteeing the future. But if you... It always ends with Mikey essentially killing off quite a few members of the crew, right? Or if you try to seek Mikey out, even though he tells you not to seek him out, it always ends with him hurting the person who sought him out. I would really like to know other people's opinions about this. But I think Kisaki being there was what was saving Mikey's soul. But who knows, right? Who knows? Either way, I'm hyped for the next chapter. Again, thank you for listening. If you like what you're hearing so far about, Tokyo Revengers, please be sure to check out our actual podcast where we cover other manga that myself and my co-host Matt read. We share a lot of similar opinions. We talk, go in depth and whatnot. But thank you as always for listening, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm hyped for the next chapter. Peace.